So today we're going to be talking about right view in particular. Because when you experience Nibbana for the first time, right view starts to become established in your mind. As I was saying yesterday, right view has many different levels. There's a mundane level and a super mundane level. And at the very mundane level, it's basically knowing what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. So when you experience a level of awakening, you get some insights. You get some clarity about how your mind works at the deepest level. And how this whole process of samsara is created in your mind and through your experiences. And so I've been talking about karma and rebirth. And I've been talking about how karma is mechanized through the links of dependent origination. So at the very core of this, we are going to be talking about dependent origination. Yesterday I gave you an introduction to the Four Noble Truths. Traditionally and generally we understand the Four Noble Truths to be suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. But actually when we look at the Four Noble Truths, it is a toolkit. It is a framework. That is to say, you diagnose what is the issue, diagnose the cause of the issue, understand how to cease that issue, and what are the methods that lead to the cessation of that issue. So what we're going to find is you can actually apply the Four Noble Truths to every link of dependent origination that arises. So I will begin and we will unravel this whole process. Thus have I heard on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. There the Venerable Sariputta addressed the bhikkhus thus, "Friends, bhikkhus." "Yes," they replied. The Venerable Sariputta said this, one of right view is said, friends. In what way is a noble disciple?" When he uses the term noble disciple, it comes from the word Arya Savaka. Here Arya denotes one who has experienced some level of awakening, a stream enterer or above. In what way is a noble disciple one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There is a sutta called Mahaparinibbana Sutta. In the Pali Canon, this is Digha Nikaya, I believe Digha Nikaya 15, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 16. And in there, Ananda asks the Buddha, how do you define someone who has experienced awakening? At the very least, who has experienced stream entry. And the Buddha says there is what is known as the mirror of Dhamma. And what he says there, he says, one who has unwavering confidence in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. This is what is known as a stream winner, really. Yes, we talk about the other two fetters, Sakaya Ditti, which is self-view, and clinging to rites and rituals. But the core is unwavering, unshakable confidence and faith, conviction in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. That is not something based on belief. That is not something based on you have to believe this. That is based on experience. Seeing for oneself how this process works. and truly experiencing cessation, and thereby experiencing Nibbana, coming to an experiential confidence that this path really works. So one of right view is one who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma. And so they say, indeed, friend, we would come from far away to learn from the Venerable Sariputta the meaning of this statement. It would be good if the Venerable Sariputta would explain the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the bhikkhus will remember it. Then, friends, listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, friend, the bhikkhus replied. The Venerable Sariputta said this. When, friends, a noble disciple understands the unwholesome and the root of the unwholesome, the wholesome and the root of the wholesome, in that way he is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what, friends, is the unwholesome? What is the root of the unwholesome? What is the wholesome? What is the root of the wholesome? Killing living beings is unwholesome. Taking what is not given is unwholesome. Misconduct in sensual pleasures is unwholesome. False speech is unwholesome. Malicious speech is unwholesome. Harsh speech is unwholesome. Gossip is unwholesome. Covetousness is unwholesome. Ill will is unwholesome. Wrong view is unwholesome. This is called the unwholesome. And what is the root of the unwholesome? Greed is a root of the unwholesome. Hate is a root of the unwholesome. Delusion is a root of the unwholesome. This is called the root of the unwholesome. So here he's talking about the 10 akusalas, right? The 10 unwholesome actions. I want to unpack this further, but I'll read through and I'm going to go into another sutta, which gives you in detail what is actually happening, because this unwholesome conduct is mental, verbal, and physical. And he says wrong view is unwholesome. What does that mean, wrong view? We will come to that. The root of the unwholesome, there are these 3 roots: greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, that is the mind that says, I want this, I need this. It grasps and wants more and more of things. Hatred is that which resists experiences, resists people, resists situations, pushes things away. From here there is ill will and aversion. Delusion is rooted in ignorance. Ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. Not being mindful, aware, and applying the Four Noble Truths. You see, the Four Noble Truths, of course, it is a framework for understanding the Dhamma. But it is also, as I said, a mechanism for you to apply in your daily life, moment to moment. And I'll show you how that is. The more you do this, the easier it becomes for you to see the Four Noble Truths, and thereby establish right view deeper and deeper. And so what is the wholesome? Abstention from killing living beings is wholesome. Abstention from taking what is not given is wholesome. Abstention from misconduct and sensual pleasures is wholesome. Abstention from false speech is wholesome. Abstention from malicious speech is wholesome. Abstention from harsh speech is wholesome. Abstention from gossip is wholesome. Uncovetousness is wholesome. Non-ill will is wholesome. Right view is wholesome. This is called the wholesome. And what is the root of the wholesome? Non-greed is a root of the wholesome. Non-hate is a root of the wholesome. Non-delusion is a root of the wholesome. This is called the root of the wholesome. Non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion. In other words, letting go of craving of all types, letting go of aversion, and coming to the true Dhamma, coming to right view. No longer being deluded by taking things personally. You realize the misperceptions that the mind has and start to let go of those misperceptions. In other words, what is impermanent, the mind would have a tendency to see as permanent. What is liable to cause suffering, the mind would have a tendency to see as a source of happiness. What is not self, the mind would have a tendency to take personal and say, this is me, mine, myself. This is delusion. This is the ignorance that we're talking about. So how do you come to the understanding of the three characteristics? By understanding dependent origination. By understanding that all things that are conditioned are impermanent, therefore liable to cause suffering. And all things are not self, including nibbana. So I'm going to explore this first. What is the wholesome and the unwholesome? This is another sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya 41. So I'm starting from sutta number 41, which is Salayaka Sutta. And this is starting from part 7, and then going down until until 17. Householders, there are three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. Unrighteous conduct. There are four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. Unrighteous conduct. There are three kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. Unrighteous conduct. And how, householders, are there three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma? Unrighteous conduct. Here, someone kills living beings. He is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. He takes what is not given. He takes by way of theft the wealth and property of others in the village or forest. He misconducts himself in sensual pleasures. He has intercourse with those who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who have a partner, who are protected by law, and even with those who are garlanded in token of betrothal, meaning those who are engaged. That is how there are three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma, the unrighteous conduct. So that is killing and harming living beings, taking what is not given, and sensual or sexual misconduct. And how, householders, are there four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma? Unrighteous conduct. Here someone speaks falsehood when summoned to a court, or to a meeting, or to his relative's presence, or to his guild, or to the royal family's presence, and questioned as a witness thus, "So, good man, tell what you know." Not knowing, he says, "I know," or knowing, he says, "I do not know." Not seeing, he says, "I see," or seeing, he says, "I do not see." In full awareness, he speaks falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some trifling worldly end. He speaks maliciously. He repeats elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, or he repeats to these people what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who divides those who are united, a creator of divisions, who enjoys discord, rejoices in discord, delights in discord, a speaker of words that create discord. He speaks harshly. He utters those words that are rough, hard, hurtful to others, offensive to others, bordering on anger, unconducive to collectedness. He gossips. He speaks at the wrong time, speaks what is not fact, speaks what is useless, speaks contrary to the Dhamma and the discipline. At the wrong time, he speaks such words as are worthless, unreasonable, immoderate, and unbeneficial. This is how there are 4 kinds of verbal conduct, not in accordance with the Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. And how, householders, are there 3 kinds of mental conduct, not in accordance with the Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. Here, someone is covetous. He covets the wealth and property of others thus, "Oh, may what belongs to another be mine." Or he has a mind of ill will and intentions of hate thus, "May these beings be slain and slaughtered, may they be cut off, perish, or annihilated." Or he has a wrong view, distorted vision thus, "There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, no fruit or result of good and bad actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have themselves realized by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world." This is wrong view. This is very specific. There is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. Meaning there is no merit in giving. There is no merit in generosity. There is no merit in gratitude. No fruit or result of good and bad actions. There is no consequence to our actions. No this world, no other world. Now, formally, this means that there's no meaning in this world, and there is no afterlife. There is no other world beyond. But I had somebody who talked about this, and it was an interesting interpretation, which is that there is no world in terms of the mundane, everything that we see around us and experience through the sense bases, and no other world, meaning no possibility to attain jhana. Because that's the supramundane, right? The physical world is through our 5 physical sense bases. To attain jhana, we need the mind. The jhanas are associated with the Brahmalokas, right? Because the different factors are associated with the Brahmalokas. But the idea is that there's no possibility to attain jhana, no possibility to attain a meditative state. This is an interesting interpretation that someone had. No mother, no father. In other words, it's not saying that there is no such thing as a mother and father. What it's saying is that we don't owe anything to our mother and father. There's no gratitude, no need to be grateful for our parents. Here the idea is one is respectful to one's parents. Now, in many different situations, parents are not ideal. Some parents are even abusive. Some parents even, are terrible to their children. Absolutely terrible to their children. Having said that, and perhaps it may be so, one can still have an appreciation for one's parents insofar as the fact that they brought us into this life with the opportunity to experience the Dhamma in this life. That is a minimum. That can be appreciated at the minimum. No beings who are reborn spontaneously. So here there is the idea that there is no such thing as rebirth, that no beings are reborn from one consciousness to the next consciousness. Now we talked about rebirth and we asked, do we need to believe in rebirth and things like that? And I said, no, you don't need to. But you should be open to the idea. There's no need to believe in it. That's the thing about the Dhamma. It doesn't ask you to believe on faith. It asks you to test and see for yourself. And eventually you start to see for yourself how consciousness arises and passes away. And from that, the mind extrapolates that there is a possibility of rebirth. But closing off the idea that no, there is no such thing as rebirth doesn't allow you to go further and explore. So here we're talking about having a mind that is open. Having a mind that is able to say, okay, I'm willing to see this and see if this is true or not. No good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have themselves realized by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. This is basically having no conviction that the Buddha was there, or there was the Buddha, and Arahats who experienced what the Buddha experienced. That is how there are three kinds of mental conduct, not in accordance with the Dhamma: unrighteous conduct. And then he talks about and how householders, there are three kinds of bodily conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. There are four kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. There are three kinds of mental conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. And how householders are there three kinds of bodily conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. Here, someone abandoning the killing of living beings abstains from killing living beings. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly he abides compassionate to all living beings. Abandoning the taking of what is not given, he abstains from taking what is not given. He does not take by way of theft the wealth and property of others in the village or in the forest. Abandoning misconduct in sensual pleasures, he abstains from misconduct in sensual pleasures. He does not have intercourse with those who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who have a husband or a wife, who are protected by law, or with those who are garlanded in token of betrothal or engaged. That is how there are three kinds of bodily conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. And how householders are there four kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dhamma. Righteous conduct. Here someone abandoning a false speech abstains from false speech when summoned to a court or to a meeting or to a relative's presence or to his guild or to the royal family's presence. And questioned as a witness thus, "So, good man, tell what you know." Not knowing, he says, "I do not know." Or knowing, he says, "I know." Not seeing, he says, "I do not see." Or seeing, he says, "I see." He does not in full awareness speak falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some trifling worldly end. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, nor does he repeat to these people what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, speaker of words that promote concord. So it's not just about not spreading false rumors, but it's also about being a peacemaker. If you see two people arguing, two people fighting, you can break up that fight. Make peace between those two people. This is also part of right conduct, knowing what is wholesome and unwholesome. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by many, and agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks on what is good, speaks on the Dhamma and the discipline. At the right time, he speaks such words as are worth recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. That is how there are 4 kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, righteous conduct. And how, householders, are there 3 kinds of mental conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, righteous conduct. Here, someone who is not covetous. He does not covet the wealth and property of others. Thus, O may what belongs to another be mine. His mind is without ill will, and he has intentions free from hate. And he says, may these beings be free from enmity, affliction, and anxiety. May they live happily. He has right view, undistorted vision. Thus, there is what is given and what is offered and what is sacrificed. In other words, there is merit in generosity. There is merit in giving, whether it is to a layperson or to the Sangha of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. There is fruit and result of good and bad actions. You see for yourself how there are consequences to your actions, mental, verbal, and bodily. There is mother and father. You have gratitude for your parents, no matter how they were, because they gave you an opportunity to be in this existence, to be able to experience the Dhamma. There are beings who are, there is this world and the other world. So you see for yourself that there is this world made up of its different sense bases through which you experience this world. There is the other world, the possibility that there are other existences. And you see it for yourself. When we talk about different kinds of planes of existence, we already see one specific plane of existence beyond just the human plane. We already see it. The animal existence. Animals have their own kind of existence, right? They're having their own experience through however they are experiencing through their sense bases and the aggregates that they possess. Beyond that, of course, there are other beings within the realms of existence, which, for the time being, some cannot see. But that there is a possibility of other beings, there the mind should be open about. And that there is a possibility of achieving the ability to see these things. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously, again, having the open-mindedness to be able to say, okay, maybe rebirth does exist. There are good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have themselves realized by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. So this is having faith in the Buddha and his disciples, his noble disciples. That is how there are 3 kinds of mental conduct in accordance with the Dhamma, righteous conduct. So, coming back to right view, saying, good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Now we are getting into the framework of the 4 Noble Truths. Listen to what he said. There is nutriment, there is the origin of nutriment, there is the cessation of nutriment, and there is a way leading to the cessation of these nutriments. By understanding this and being able to apply the 4 Noble Truths in that way, one starts to establish right view. And what is nutriment? What is the origin of nutriment? What is the cessation of nutriment? What is the way leading to the cessation of nutriment? There are 4 kinds of nutriment for the maintenance of beings that already have come to be and for the support of those beings about to come to be. Nutriment here, nutrition, food, support for those who are already existing and for those about to come into existence, meaning those who are about to be born. What for? They are physical food as nutriment, gross or subtle, contact as the second, mental volition as the third, and consciousness as the fourth. So these are the 4 kinds of nutriment. Physical food. Obviously, physical food, gross or subtle. So gross means the food that we eat. Subtle refers to the foods that other beings would eat, higher beings would enjoy. But physical food for the nutriment of the body, for the sustenance of the body. Contact as the second. Contact. We're going to go deeper into contact. But contact means the eye makes contact with the sight or the object of sight. And the other sense bases make contact with the objects of their sense bases. So this is contact. Contact as nutriment gives rise to feeling. You need the initial spark, the touch between the eye and the object, the color and form, the ears and sounds, the nose and odor, the tongue and an object of taste, the body and tangibles, mind and mind objects. When they make contact, then there is an experience, which is feeling. So with contact as nutriment, there comes feeling. Mental volition as the third. Mental volition. Mental volition produces karma. You do not act mentally, verbally, or physically without first an intention being present. And then you act. There is an action. And mental volition here can also be understood as formations, as sankharas, which then give rise to consciousness. Consciousness as the fourth. Consciousness gives rise to name and form. Nama rupa, mentality, materiality. Consciousness is nutriment for the body to continue. There is an interdependency between mind and body and consciousness, which we will explore as we go deeper. But dependent on consciousness, the mind and body can function. But for consciousness to continue, it needs the anchor of mind and body. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of nutriment. Very interesting. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of nutriment. With craving, there arises physical food. With craving, there arises contact. With craving, there arises mental volition. With craving, there arises consciousness. Because what it's saying here is craving, the identification process. Sensual craving, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. That gives rise to further rebirths in every moment of consciousness, plus from one life to the next. So craving is that which fosters the ability for new consciousness to arise. Craving is that which allows the contact to arise, in the sense that contact can be imbued with a craving mindset. Your mind can incline towards something already that says, I want this, or I don't like this, even before you actually experience it. And that is dependent upon mental volitions, which can be rooted in craving as well. So these are what are known as the abhisankharas, karmic formations that are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So this is how craving manifests Now, what about physical food? Craving manifests in terms of the production of food, right? We require food, we require sustenance, but there can be craving in relation to that food. There can be, as we talked about a couple of days ago and even yesterday a little bit, that one can become very obsessed with food. One can enjoy food for the adornment of the body, for intoxication, for pleasure, and identify with that. Or one can understand food as what it actually is, the ability to sustain the body and prevent the arising of new feelings of hunger. So just to satisfy the physical, biological hunger, you have food. With the cessation of craving, with the cessation of identification, with the cessation of aversion, there is the cessation of nutriment. The way leading to the cessation of nutriment is just this Noble Eightfold Path. Now here is what I am going to propose that you do when you listen to this. What I would say is whenever it is said that the way leading to the cessation of an experience for anything from here on out, you can apply the process of right effort. Because right effort is the heart of the Eightfold Path. Which means when he says the way leading to the cessation of a particular link, he's saying use right effort. In other words, using the 6 R's. Remember yesterday what I said about the 6 R's. The 6 R's not only allow you to fulfill the right effort, the 4 right efforts, allow you to activate the enlightenment factors, but they also allow you to see and apply the 4 Noble Truths in every moment. Because in recognizing, you recognize here is the first Noble Truth. There's present this hindrance, or whatever it might be. Here I release and relax, and therefore abandon the source of this hindrance, which is the undue attention and identification with that hindrance. Thereby I experience the 3rd Noble Truth, which is the cessation of that attention to that hindrance. And then I generate a wholesome experience and through the smile, and maintain that through meditation on my object, thereby fulfilling the 4th aspect, which is the application of right effort, and by extension, the Noble Eightfold Path. So what he says, the way leading to the cessation of nutriment is just this Noble Eightfold Path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. When a noble disciple has thus understood nutriment, the origin of nutriment, the cessation of nutriment, and the way leading to the cessation of nutriment, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to greed. He entirely abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit I am. And by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, he here and now makes an end of suffering. So in other words, he abandons the underlying tendency to greed. So there are these 7 underlying tendencies, which we'll go into when we explore feeling. But the underlying tendency to greed, he completely eliminates that, which means there can no longer arise the potential for craving. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He lets go of the root of any kind of ill will and aversion. He extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit of I am. Completely eliminates the idea of identifying with any process, and thereby comes to the right view, and thereby makes an end of suffering. In other words, when you abolish these 3, when you exterminate these three, eradicate these three, then you come to full awakening, make a complete end of suffering. Saying, good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. So, coming to the experience of the Four Noble Truths in of themselves. And what is suffering? What is the origin of suffering? What is the cessation of suffering? What is the way leading to the cessation of suffering? Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Not to obtain what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates affected by craving and clinging are suffering. This is called suffering. We already talked about this yesterday. What is the origin of suffering? It is craving, which brings renewal of being. It is accompanied by delight and lust and delights in this and that. That is the craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being and craving for non-being. This is called the origin of suffering. And what is the cessation of suffering? It is the remainderless fading away and ceasing, the giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same suffering. Letting go of craving. Rejecting of that same craving. So meaning identifying that the mind is craving and letting it go, using right effort, using the 6 R's. This is called the cessation of suffering. What is the way leading to the cessation of suffering? It is just this noble eightfold path. This is called the way leading to the cessation of suffering. When a noble disciple has thus understood suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Saying, good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But, friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands aging and death, the origin of aging and death, the cessation of aging and death, and the way leading to the cessation of aging and death, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. We've discussed this already. What is aging and death? What is the source of aging and death? What is the cessation of aging and death? What is the way leading to the cessation of aging and death? The aging of beings in the various orders of beings, their old age, brokenness of teeth, grayness of hair, wrinkling of skin, decline of life, weakness of faculties. This is called aging. The passing of beings out of the various orders of beings, their passing away, dissolution, disappearance, dying, completion of time, dissolution of the aggregates, laying down of the body. This is called death. So this aging and this death are what is called aging and death. With the arising of birth, there is the arising of aging and death. With the cessation of birth, there is the cessation of aging and death. The way leading to the cessation of aging and death is just this noble eightfold path. Can you use the 6 R's, the 6 R, aging and death? You can't prevent aging, you can't prevent death. You can't prevent certain kinds of suffering. We talked about this yesterday. Aging and death is part of that whole mass of suffering. So when they talk about aging and death in particular, they're talking about aging of the body, death of the body, but the whole mass of suffering. Birth leads to that whole mass of suffering. With the arising of birth, there is the arising of aging and death. With the cessation of birth, there is a cessation of aging and death. But now we are in earnest talking about dependent origination. We are going from the end, which is the 12th link, and working our way back all the way to ignorance and beyond. Now, when we talk about dependent origination, there are 3 ways we can understand dependent origination. Dependent origination in the form of one existence to the next existence, one life to the next life. Dependent origination in terms of the very micro level, which happens in every moment. When we talk about the arising and passing away of consciousness, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of iotas of arising and passing away of consciousnesses. But consciousness is just one link in that series of dependent origination. So in that moment, we are experiencing over and over and over again, continuously, contact, feeling, perception. We're experiencing formations, consciousness. We're experiencing nama-rupa. We're experiencing the 6 sense bases, contact, feeling, perception. And then dependent upon that, there's karma. Dependent upon that, there's the ignorance and so on. We're experiencing that in every moment, whether we know it or not. The Buddha has said that whether there is a Buddha or there is not a Buddha, there is always going to be this dependent origination. This cycling of experience through the different links of dependent origination. So, but there are ways to recognize dependent origination at the experiential level as well, in day-to-day life. You can recognize when contact happens, right now. When I snap my finger, that was millions and millions and millions of contact going on in that moment. That sound, before you heard the sound, right, the snap led your ear to receive the sound. There was sound waves making contact with the instruments in your ears, right? So that was contact. Then the actual sound, which is the feeling. Knowing that it's the snap of the finger, that's the perception. So you can recognize this in your experiences. Not only with the ears, but any of the sense faculties. Being able to be mindful in this way, being able to recognize in this way, allows the mind to be free from greed, hatred, and delusion. Allows the mind to be free from identifying with those processes. The moment you observe things, the moment you just observe your thoughts, you no longer become those thoughts. You no longer become that process of experience. That separation allows a gap there. That gap is cushioning your mind from going into full-blown craving. This is why mindfulness is of the utmost importance. Having clarity of mind in every moment. When we are doing this meditation, we are starting to experience the mundane form of nibbana, so to speak. Because we are able to recognize when there is suffering in the form of the hindrance, in the form of irritation, in the form of taking things personally. And we are able to let go of that through right effort. And just for those few micro moments, we're able to experience this spacious mind, empty of all craving, empty of all suffering. And just for those micro moments, we're able to experience nirodha, experience nibbana, the quenching of that thirst of craving, of greed, hatred, and delusion. So when that is all predicated upon mindfulness, full awareness of what's going on. When there is mindfulness, there is what is known as yoniso manasikara, attention rooted in reality, which sees everything as being an impermanent, impersonal process. Seeing it in this way, the mind will not experience suffering, whether it's through a pleasurable feeling a displeasurable feeling or a neutral feeling. The delineation point is really between feeling and craving. The experience towards full-blown craving. And we're going to talk about that more as we get into it. But the reason I'm bringing this up is for you to understand that for us to be able to let go of suffering, it can happen right now, here in this moment. But all it requires is the mind being able to be 100% mindful in every moment. This is what you're training yourself to do in this process throughout these 10 days. You are going to notice the clarity of color around you. You're going to notice the clarity of sounds around you. You're going to notice the clarity of taste around you. The more mindful you become, the less identified with things you become. And because there is no impediment of identifying with situations, experiences, and feeling, you have clear experience of everything. Nothing filtering that process. And because of that, you don't identify. Because of that, you don't take things personally. It really boils down to that, not taking things personally. That sounds very mundane, but if you really go at the root of that, you will realize that there is no underlying self in any experience. There is no permanent underlying self in any experience. This is the root of experiencing the cessation of suffering. The more you're able to see this, the easier it becomes for you to experience things fully without the sense of me, mine, or myself. Saying, "Good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands birth, the origin of birth, the cessation of birth, and the way leading to the cessation of birth, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma." And what is birth? What is the origin of birth? What is the cessation of birth? What is the way leading to the cessation of birth? The birth of beings in the various orders of beings, their coming to birth, precipitation in a womb, generation, manifestation of the aggregates, obtaining the basis for contact. This is called birth. With the arising of being, there is the arising of birth. With the cessation of being, there is the cessation of birth. The way leading to the cessation of birth is just this noble eightfold path. Now, here, when we talk about birth, the birth of the aggregates, in truth, in every moment, there is the arising and passing away of consciousness. We've talked about this before. But in truth, your sense bases are also experiencing rebirth in every moment. They either become weaker or they become more sharp. Right? They are experiencing a cycling through. Every time the eyes are experiencing something, there is a new process happening which revitalizes the eye faculty or weakens the eye faculty. Same with the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, or the mind itself. When we talk about birth in terms of the birth of a being, there are different kinds of orders of beings, different kinds of birth processes, through the process of being in the womb, through the process of being in an egg, through the process of moisture, or spontaneous generation, which is in relation to devas and brahmas and hell beings and all the other things like that. But for right here and now, to understand birth, to be very practical about it, let's approach it from a different perspective, which is the birth of karma, the birth of action. The way to look at dependent origination is it cycles through, as we said, in every moment. The dependent origination is like a stream that turns into a river, and there are whirlpools and vortices and rapids. And each of these whirlpools create a link of dependent origination. And then becoming, which we'll get to in a moment. This is the becoming into a new existence in the next moment. That then creates the circumstances for the birth of action. Mental action, verbal action, bodily action. In that process of that river, the bending towards the waterfall, that bending is the becoming. And then the waterfall, going down the waterfall, is the birth of action. When there is birth of action, karmic action, when there's the birth of karmic action, there is suffering, because you're adding to that repository of karma. And that is predicated upon being, which we'll talk about in a moment, as I said. But what I'm saying here is, as soon as you produce the action, there's no way for you to call it back. As soon as you speak the word, there's no way for you to call it back. As soon as you produce the action in your body, there's no way for you to call it back. As soon as you think something or have an intention of something, there's no way for you to call it back. You will then experience the consequences of that action, if it is rooted in taking things personally. There are two types of action here. For one who is fully awakened, that action does not produce any new karma, because it does not go through and is predicated through the processes of clinging, of craving, clinging, and becoming. That action that the Arahat, or the fully awakened being, produces is dependent upon the Noble Eightfold Path. Their speech will always be right speech. Their action will always be right action. Their effort will always be right effort. Their intention will always be right intention. And that doesn't produce any new karma that binds a being to samsara. Instead, it further lets go. The more you do this, the easier it becomes, until it becomes the default mode of thinking in your mind, the default mode of being, the default mode in terms of how you think, how you speak, and how you act. So when we talk about the birth of action, we are saying that that is dependent upon becoming. That is dependent upon being. So we'll discuss how that's the case. When a noble disciple has thus understood birth, the origin of birth, the cessation of birth, and the way leading to the cessation of birth, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. "But, friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands being, the origin of being, the cessation of being, and the way leading to the cessation of being. In that way, he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma." And what is being? What is the origin of being? What is the cessation of being? What is the way leading to the cessation of being? There are these three kinds of being: sense sphere being, fine material being, and immaterial being. With the arising of clinging, there is the arising of being. With the cessation of clinging, there is the cessation of being. The way leading to the cessation of being is just this Noble Eightfold Path. So now we talked about birth of action. As soon as there is the birth of action, you cannot recall that action. You cannot 6R away whatever it is that you've produced in the way of your mind, body, and speech. But before that, you can 6R things. What is being? What is becoming? We use another word, another phrase for being, which is known as habitual tendencies. Sense sphere being, fine material being, and immaterial being. Tendencies that lead towards these kinds of existences. Psychological states We don't need to think about beings externally. Let's let go of that for a moment. We don't need to think about the 31 planes of existence. But we can see that even in our present experience, in our present existence, we can have psychological states that are associated with Deva-like beings, that are associated with Brahma-like beings, that are associated with hellish-like beings. Whenever there is anger, whenever there is hatred, whenever there is ill will, the mind constricts and becomes like a hellish being. The psychological state produces suffering right there and then. And so the habitual tendencies rooted in that anger lead to a birth of action that is rooted in that anger. Things boil up to the surface, right? And this boiling up is that process of dependent origination. From craving, clinging, to becoming. That habitual tendency. It's a library of different kinds of reactions that your mind gravitates towards almost automatically. When you are met with certain situations, you already prejudge what that situation is, never looking at it freshly. That is because of the habitual tendencies. Person who is generous, a person who is loving and kind, a person who is compassionate and forgiving, they have a Deva-like nature. And so the habitual tendencies there are more Deva-like. A person who continues to practice jhana, remains in jhana, in whatever it is they're doing, their psychological state is similar to that of a Brahmaloka being. Person who goes into the immaterial planes of existence, that is to say infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness and neither perception or non-perception, and their mind habituates towards that. Their psychological state is similar to those of the immaterial beings. But regardless of where that mind is, it still produces karma. Whether you're wholesome or unwholesome, it still produces the birth of action. The only way to let go of the production of new karma is to stop taking any action personally. Easier said than done. But we will see how that happens when we go into clinging and craving, the preceding links. So habitual tendencies, it's a repository of reactions, right? You meet with somebody who you know this person is always going to act this way. That's a habitual tendency, right? You don't give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they are different. Now, a prime example of this is you meet a friend from high school after many, many years, but you still have an image of who that person is based on what you experienced in high school. And so you expect them to be that same kind of person. And then when you meet them, you realize, oh, they are different. They're no longer that same person. That is similar to having habitual emotional tendencies. Certain kinds of reactions the mind just selects automatically, dependent upon the situation. So if your mindset, when you're stuck in traffic, your mindset is, I really hate this traffic. Every time you're met with traffic, you're going to have a mindset which says, I hate that traffic. When you meet certain kinds of people, you prejudge those kinds of people. Maybe you met somebody who was, treacherous. Somebody who betrayed your trust. Now you meet a similar kind of person. Your habitual tendency will be, you prejudge and say, that person is this way. This is one layer of habitual tendencies. The other layer is the psychological states that are associated with the different realms, with the different lokas, through which you act because you identify with those states. You say, this is me, this is mine, this is myself. So, can you 6R habitual tendencies? Can you use the 6Rs to let go of habitual tendencies? Yes, you can. So let's say you are met with a person who you prejudge and say, this person is going to betray me. They are untrustworthy. You can recognize that thought in your mind, release your attention from it, relax, let go of that, and recondition the tendency to say, I am willing to trust this person. Or anything that might happen, where the mind automates towards some kind of reaction. You need that cushion, you need that gap, you need that pause for a few moments to recognize and say, oh, wait, here the mind is starting to tend towards this automatic reaction. And then let go of that processing. By doing this, you let go of the potential for renewal of karma through the birth of action. So yes, you can change, recondition your habitual tendencies, and ultimately let go of all habitual tendencies. The fully awakened mind may have certain preferences dependent upon the body, but it won't have habitual tendencies. It sees everything fresh. It doesn't prejudge a person. It doesn't prejudge a being or a situation. Everything is fresh in the moment. Think about the quality of that mind. There's a tendency, right, in the mind to always calculate. Should I do this? Should I do that? Where should I go? What should I do? Can I trust this person? Is this person going to trick me? I'm met in this kind of situation. Think about this the first time you visit a new place. Right? You go out of the country and you visit a new place or a different city. First time, everything is fresh. You don't have any prejudgments about that place. That's the perception of one who is fully awakened, qualitatively speaking. Everything is fresh. They don't make judgments about anyone. No habitual reactions. No habitual tendencies. There is perception. There is feeling. There's contact. All that will be there. But everything is seen as it actually is. Impersonal and impermanent. Therefore, not worth holding on to. When a noble disciple has thus understood being, the origin of being, the cessation of being, and the way leading to the cessation of being, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Saying, good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But, friend, might there be yet another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands clinging, the origin of clinging, the cessation of clinging, and the way leading to the cessation of clinging, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is clinging? What is the origin of clinging? What is the cessation of clinging? And what is the way leading to the cessation of clinging? There are these 4 kinds of clinging. Clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and observances, and clinging to a doctrine of self. With the arising of craving, there is the arising of clinging. With the cessation of craving, there is a cessation of clinging. The way leading to the cessation of clinging is just this noble eightfold path. So, clinging, upadana. Clinging is that process in the mind that starts to make associations with an experience. Clinging to sensual pleasures, that is creating an identity around an experience. So craving, that is saying, I like this thing or I don't like this thing. Therefore, it makes associations. The process of making associations, the process of gathering what is your favorite and what are your dislikes, is the process of clinging to sensual pleasures. When you grow up as a little kid, somebody asks you, what is your favorite color? You don't really have a favorite color as a little kid, but then you decide red is my favorite color. You like the color red and you make an association. And so anytime you have the color red, you say, oh, that's my favorite color. You've created an identity as the person who says, I like the color red. Somehow you don't like the color purple. Every time you see the color purple, there's an association that I don't like that. Or you grow up eating a certain kind of dish, a certain kind of food that your mother makes. You crave for that kind of food, and then you cling and you say, this is my favorite kind of food. Or you have a certain kind of smell that you like, certain kind of fragrance that you like, certain kinds of smells that you associated with negative experiences. And every time that smell comes up, there is this clinging which says, I don't like this. And then from there is the becoming of the person who doesn't like this, from which then the person acts and says, I hate that, pushes that away. I don't know how it is here in the supermarkets here in India. And it used to be. I haven't been in the supermarket for some time. But in the US, like in Walmart and different places like that, it was that when you have the cereal aisle, you see all of the different cereals, right? But all of the sugary, colorful cereals are down here at the lower level. Why? Right? It's targeting the kids. And so now the kids look at that and they say, oh, that's so colorful. I want that. And they take that and they eat that and they like that and they associate happy times with that cereal. You see commercials, you see advertisements. What is that? That is the production of clinging to sensual pleasures. Right? You see an ad for a Mercedes or a BMW and you see this person who's all successful and, everything is wonderful with their life. Now you associate that product with this is what success is. And now you cling to that idea. You cling to that sensual pleasure. You make those associations. So, craving, when there's craving and you say, oh, I see that Mercedes. I want that Mercedes. Now you create a goal for that. Now you cling to that idea that I have to possess that Mercedes. And then you become that person. And then you produce actions. How do I get that? How do I obtain that? It can be as large as that, or very small things, minor things when it comes to sensual experiences. When somebody's at a funeral, right, people try to, when the person is grieving, they might put their hand on their shoulder and try to support them and say, it's all right, everything is fine. But now that rubbing of the shoulder, you've made an association. And now you go to a birthday party, and somebody does the same thing out of affection. But now the memory is that funeral. You've made the association, right? This is how trauma arises. People make associations with different kinds of traumatic experiences, and then they relive that because of the clinging. But you can 6R clinging. You can let go of clinging. You can recognize here is the mind starting to grasp onto something, starting to produce an identity around something, starting to become something through that clinging. You can recognize it, release your attention from it, relax, and then replace it with something else. Again, I say it's easier said than done, but as you start to sharpen your clarity of mind, as you start to sharpen your mindfulness, you'll be able to start to recognize when those times that the mind starts to make associations are, and start to let go and disassociate. Then there is the clinging to views. This is rarely in reference to clinging to certain kinds of wrong views. There are these 62 different types of wrong view. But don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. But what we're talking about here is clinging to certain kinds of views, like the 6 kinds of contemporary views that were present during the Buddha's time. I'll go through those briefly from the Digha Nikaya 2, a small section in Digha Nikaya 2. And then you can recognize for yourself if the mind possesses these kinds of view. So this is the view of a person named Purana Kassapa. And he said, by the doer or instigator of a thing, by one who cuts or causes to be cut, by one who burns or causes to be burnt, by one who causes grief and weariness, by one who agitates or causes agitation, who causes life to be taken, or that which is not given to be taken, commits burglary, commits robbery, lies in ambush, commits adultery, tells lies, no evil is done. So here this view is saying there's no meaning anywhere. It's a nihilistic kind of view. If with a razor-sharp wheel one were to make of this earth one single mass and heap of flesh, there would be no evil as a result of that. No evil would accrue. If one were to go along the south bank of the Ganges, killing, slaying, cutting, or causing to be cut, burning or causing to be burned, there would be no evil as a result of that. No evil would accrue. If one were to go along the north bank of the Ganges, giving and causing to be given, sacrificing and causing to be sacrificed, there would be no merit as a result of that. No merit would accrue. In giving, self-control, abstinence, telling the truth, there is no merit, and no merit accrues. This is a life of no meaning. It's a very nihilistic way of looking at things. And so here, the view is wrong view, right? Because it's saying, I can do as many evil things as I want, but I won't get caught by it. There will be no karma that will be accrued by it. Yeah, sure, in this life we do see some people do get away with it. Some people abscond. But at some point or another, they will experience karma. Maybe not physically, but imagine the state of their mind. You see, karma is not just the physical. Even guilt, even remorse is a karmic reaction to the things that you have done. Of course, when you talk about sociopaths and psychopaths, they don't have remorse either. But still, what we're talking about here is for every action that we do, good or bad, there is a result. So this particular view is in direct violation of what we see as right view. That there is actually meaning in giving. There is meaning in being generous. There is meaning in being wholesome. And there are consequences when we are unwholesome, even at the very minutest level of the mind. Then there is the view of Makali Gosala. He says, there is no cause or condition for the defilement of beings. They are defiled without cause or condition. There is no cause or condition for the purification of beings. They are purified without cause or condition. There is no self-power or other power. There is no power in humans, no strength or force, no vigor or exertion. All beings, all living beings, all creatures, all that lives is without control, without power or strength. They experience the fixed course of pleasure and pain through the 6 kinds of rebirth. There are 1,400,000 principal sorts of birth, and 6,000 others, and again 600. There are 500 kinds of karma, or 5 kinds, and 3 kinds, and half karma, 62 paths, 62 intermediary eons, 6 classes of humankind, 8 stages of human progress, 4,900 occupations, 4,900 wanderers, 4,900 abodes of nagas, 2,000 sentient existences, 3,000 hells, 36 places of dust, 7 classes of rebirth as conscious beings, 7 as unconscious beings, and 7 as beings freed from bonds, 7 grades of devas, men, goblins, 7 lakes, 7 great and 7 small protuberances, 7 great and 7 small abysses, 7 great and 7 small dreams, 8,400,000 eons during which fools and wise run on and circle around till they make an end of suffering. Therefore, there is no such thing as saying by this discipline or practice or austerity or holy life, I will bring my unripened karma to fruition, or I will gradually make my ripened karma go away. He's saying there is no possibility of that happening. Neither of these things is possible because pleasure and pain have already been measured out with a measure limited by the round of birth and death. And there is neither increase nor decrease, nor excellence nor inferiority. Just as a ball of string, when thrown, runs till it has all unraveled, so fools and wise run on and circle round until they make an end of suffering. This is Niyativada. This is fatalism, predeterminism. This is the view that says, whatever you do, it is already predestined. That view says that you don't have any control. You have no choice. Even your awakening is already predetermined. So what's the point of making any kind of effort? This is a kind of wrong view, because as we understand with the Dhamma, there is karma, there is action, there is consequence. How do we let go of already ripened karma? Through right effort, through wisdom. So there is a way, in every given moment there is a choice to be wholesome or unwholesome. If there was not, what are you guys doing here? What is the point of doing anything if that was the case? So this view is also in direct violation of the Dhamma. Now the third view is by Ajita Kesakambali. It's a very interesting name, Kesakambali. It means hair blanket, or blanket of hair. And he said, Your Majesty, he's talking to Ajatasattu, he says, there is nothing given, bestowed, offered in sacrifice. There is no fruit or result of good or bad actions. There is not this world or the next. There is no mother or father. There are no spontaneously arisen beings. Already we're seeing this is wrong view. There are in no world no ascetics or Brahmins who have attained, who have perfectly practiced, who proclaim this world and the next, having realized them by their own super knowledge. Now listen to this. This human being is composed of the 4 great elements. And when one dies, the earth part reverts to earth. The water part reverts to water. The fire part reverts to fire. The air part reverts to air. And the sense faculties pass away into space. They accompany the dead man with 4 bearers and the bier as 5th. Their footsteps are heard as far as the cremation ground. There the bones whiten, the sacrifice ends in ashes. It is the idea of a fool to give this gift. The talk of those who preach a doctrine of survival is vain and false. Fools and wise at the breaking up of the body are destroyed and perished. They do not exist after death. This is the view of materialism. This is the view that says, there's no point in doing anything. You are just this body, so you might as well enjoy for the sake of the body. Pursue all kinds of pleasures. Doesn't matter what it is and how you do it. Right? Even if you have to take on a loan. That was one of the ancient Indian understandings. If you have to live a good life, even if you have to steal, beg, borrow, or steal, it's worth it because you are satisfying the senses. But of course, this view also is in direct violation of the Dhamma, of right view, because already he said there's no meaning in giving, there's no meaning in generosity, there's no meaning in austerities and all of these things. There's no meaning in being grateful for one's mother and father. Just enjoy, right? Eat, drink, and be merry. That's the view. But that's the view that is predominant in the majority of the world now. Do you think the suffering is over now by doing that? The pursuit of happiness, that's one thing. But the pursuit of sensual pleasures to the point of degrading your senses, causing yourself suffering in that way. The pursuit of sensual pleasures by causing yourself harm, by taking on different kinds of loans. For what? The pursuit of pleasure by harming other individuals. This is in direct violation of the Dhamma. So this is the third wrong view. The fourth wrong view is, he says, these 7 things are not made or of a kind to be made, uncreated, unproductive, barren, false, stable as a column. They do not shake, do not change, obstruct one another, nor are they able to cause one another pleasure, pain, or both. What are the 7? The earth body, the air body, the water body, the fire body, pleasure and pain, and the life principle. These 7 are not made. There is neither slain nor slayer, neither hearer nor proclaimer, neither knower nor causer of knowing. And whoever cuts off a man's head with a sharp sword does not deprive anyone of life. He just inserts the blade in the intervening space between these 7 bodies. So here, this is kind of talking about eternalism. That, first of all, it's okay to kill beings because they're eternal anyway. Right? They possess something that is eternal. So if you kill them, you're not actually killing them. You're not actually destroying anything. But the Buddha says that everything has a cause and condition. Everything that arises passes away. There is no one consciousness that is eternal, that goes from lifetime to lifetime. Majjhima Nikaya 38 specifically says this. It says that consciousness arises dependent upon its cause and condition. Just like a fire is known by its fuel. But here the assumption is that consciousness is all-pervading and eternal. So if you kill the body, it's okay, it's all good. But you are causing harm because you are causing pain. You are inflicting pain. So this is another kind of wrong view. Then the fourth wrong view is it says, one is bound by a fourfold restraint. What for? He is curbed by all curbs, enclosed by all curbs, cleared by all curbs, and claimed by all curbs. So this is talking about one who is self-controlled and self-established through austerity practices. When he talked about curbing, he's talking about this process that you need ascetic practices to do away with your karma. Really, this is what it's talking about. It's saying that in order for me to experience the cessation of my karma, I need to do certain kind of ascetic practices. The Buddha tried all kinds of ascetic practices and found that this is not the way leading to the end of suffering. What he did find was the middle path. Not the path of exorbitant luxury, not the path of extreme asceticism, but a balanced path, the middle way, which was the Eightfold Path. Now, this view is actually in terms of the philosophy that it's referring to. It's really referring to the philosophy of Jainism, where the idea is there is a soul, and that soul picks up karmic particles. And it doesn't matter whether there was an intention or not to produce that karma. Whatever action is done, the effects of that action are produced and collected as karmic particles that attach to that soul. So there are certain things you need to do to purify the soul, ascetic practices and things like that. Now, what the Buddha said is the way to let go of karma is not through austerities, not through ascetic practices. It's by understanding, acknowledging the karma, and letting it go through experience. He says you cannot escape your karma. You cannot mitigate your karma. You have to experience the effects of previous actions. But you can do it in such a way that does not add to the repository of further karma. And that is a process through wisdom, attained through right effort. Acknowledging here is a pleasant feeling, which is old karma, or unpleasant feeling, which is also old karma. And then recognizing it, releasing any identification with it, taking it personally, and allowing it to fade away through its experiencing itself. But the moment you react to it, the moment you identify with it, it only makes it worse. It only causes further aggravation. See for yourself in your own experience when you're dealing with hindrances in your meditation, when you're dealing with any kind of situations, you will see that it causes furthering of that experience. The more you put your attention to something and try to react in such a way, it only adds fuel to the fire. But to let go of it is to acknowledge it, let it be, and let go of any reactions and identification to that process. Finally, there is the view that this is from Sanjaya Belataputta, who was the former teacher of Moggallana and Sariputta before they became disciples of the Buddha. And he says, if you ask me, is there another world? If I thought so, I would say so. But I don't think so. I don't say it is so, and I don't say otherwise. I don't say it is not, and I do not say it is not. If you ask me, is there another world? Both worlds, neither is there fruit and result of good and bad deeds. Isn't there? Is there both? Is there neither? Does the Tathagata exist after death? Does he not exist? Does he both exist and not exist? Does he neither exist nor not exist? I do not say it is so. I do not think it is so. I do not say it is so, and I do not say otherwise. These are called eel wrigglers. They're on the fence about everything. They have a lot of doubt about if it's like this or if it's like that. Should I do this? Should I not do that? Indecision. They were known as skeptics at that time. And the idea is they didn't take any position for fear of being wrong. That's it. So they said, "No, I don't know. It could be, couldn't be. We'll see how it goes. I don't really know." So that kind of process creates a lot of restlessness in the mind, creates a lot of anxiety, creates a lot of doubt. So not being sure about that is also a kind of wrong view. I mean, if you're unsure about if there is karmic consequences, if you're unsure about whether the Tathagata existed, if you're unsure about the Dhamma, then that is in direct violation of right view, which is the beginning of the Dhamma. So these are the clinging to the wrong kinds of view. There can also be clinging to right view itself, clinging to the Dhamma. Making an identity around the Dhamma, saying, I am a great meditator, or I am so-and-so. Or when you are challenged by someone, you become a Dhamma defender. I'm not saying that you don't become a Dhamma defender. What I'm saying is notice the intention in your mind. Somebody says, what you're doing is wrong. Immediately there is a reaction that happens and says, that person is wrong and I need to prove to them that they're wrong. So the clinging to the Dhamma in this way, clinging to any aspect of the Dhamma. We talk about, the Buddha has talked about the raft, the simile of the raft, right? You're on this side and you're getting to the other shore, which is Nibbana. You use the raft, which is the Eightfold Path, to go from this side to that side. Once you have reached the other shore, you don't take the raft with you and carry it along. You leave it aside. That doesn't mean you stop using the Eightfold Path. It just means stop having conceit and pride in relation to the Dhamma. Stop identifying with that. Right? Once you experience Nibbana, that's it. You've experienced it. There is a sutta, the Digha Naka Sutta, which is Majjhima Nikaya 74. And there the Buddha is talking to actually a skeptic like this guy. And the skeptic says, I cling to nothing. I don't cling to any views at all. I am free. And the Buddha says, but do you cling to the view that you don't cling to any views? And then he goes through a whole process of feeling and so on. And Sariputta was listening to him and fanning the Buddha. And then he realizes that the Buddha is not even interested in the Dhamma itself. He's not even clung to the Dhamma itself. And in that realization, he attains arahatship. He lets go of his clinging to the Dhamma. So in other words, see in your own mind, once you start to have right view, how do you identify with that right view? Do you identify as a Buddhist? Do you identify as anything that you have to defend? And then finally, clinging to different opinions about things, having views and perspectives on this or that. If somebody challenges your view, be open to be challenged. Be open to say, okay, let me hear what you have to say, instead of immediately reacting and saying, no, that person is wrong. This is also very mundane. It can be like, you have a favorite sports team. And everybody else who does not follow that sports team is an idiot. Right? So you go to watch, the new cricket game or whatever is playing on TV, and you root for that team, right? And you hope the other team loses. This is also clinging to kinds of views. Having favorites about this or that in relation to views. And then clinging to rites and rituals, clinging to rules and observances. So the clinging to rites and rituals is the idea of clinging to rites and rituals with the idea that they will take you to Nibbana. That's one aspect of it. Clinging to rites and rituals is also clinging to routine. Getting so identified and caught up with your own routine that if anything causes a detriment to that routine, you get upset by it. No, it has to be this way, If I don't get my morning coffee at 7 a.m, I'm not going to be in a good mood. Right? If I don't have breakfast by 7:30, if I don't get into the car by 8, you start thinking about this and that. It creates all kinds of restlessness. Clinging to rites and rituals also means clinging to the idea that something will produce luck for you. If I only wear my lucky socks, today, I'll be doing great in that meeting. Right? Doing these kinds of things. Because the idea that if I do this or if I do that, it's going to produce luck for me, it completely detracts the view of karma, which is through self-effort, through making your own effort to let go of things. Right? Making your own effort to build wealth, or making your own effort to get that position, whatever it is. So this is another kind of clinging to rites and rituals. And then finally, clinging to a doctrine of self. This is the Sakkaya Ditthi. This is the intellectual clinging to an idea of self in relation to the 5 aggregates. There are 20 kinds of self-view. That is the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness. Form is this body that you have, or any form, physical form. Feeling is sensation, any kind of experience that you're having. Perception is the knowledge of what that experience is, the noting of it. Formations are rooted in the intentions that you have, and consciousness, the awareness of the experience. You can take any of these and say, it is myself, that this is me, or I am in it, or it is in me, or I am possessed of it, or any other variation of that, or I am separate from it. So this kind of Sakkaya Ditthi goes away at stream entry. The intellectual belief in a personal self. The still, there's still a residual of identifying with things. That is the instinctual aspect of the mind that still identifies with things. That is eradicated when mana, when conceit is eradicated, and arahatship. Now, clinging to sensual pleasures, when does that go away? When one becomes an anagami. Clinging to views, in terms of wrong view, goes away at stream entry. Clinging to rites and rituals goes away at stream entry. When a noble disciple has thus understood clinging, the origin of clinging, the cessation of clinging, and the way leading to the cessation of clinging, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Now, can you let go of clinging? In a moment, you can let go of it. You can recognize here is the mind starting to make associations with sensual experiences. Here is the mind starting to defend a position, trying to defend a certain kind of view. Here is the mind trying to identify with certain processes. Here is the mind trying to defend this rite and ritual with the idea that it will take you to Nibbana. You can recognize that and you can let it go. By letting that go, there won't be any becoming. There won't be any habitual reactions rooted in that action of association, and thereby there won't be any birth of action dependent upon that kind of identity. Because bhava, that is being, is also the concretizing of a self. It's the cooking up of a self where it's fully formed, from which there is the birth of action. So when we say birth of action, we're saying birth of selfish action. Not selfish in the form of greedy or selfish in that way, but self-rooted action, taking the action to be personal. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. "But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands craving, the origin of craving, the cessation of craving, and the way leading to the cessation of craving. In that way, he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is craving? What is the origin of craving? What is the cessation of craving? What is the way leading to the cessation of craving? There are these 6 classes of craving. Craving for forms, craving for sounds, craving for odors, craving for flavors, craving for tangibles, craving for mind objects. With the arising of feeling, there is the arising of craving. With the cessation of feeling, there is the cessation of craving. With the way leading to the cessation of craving is just this noble eightfold path. So when we talk about craving, now this is where we talk about identifying with an experience. If it's a sensual experience, right, that is feeling. That is Vedana. You take that Vedana to be me, mine, and myself. From there arises craving. How do you go from feeling to craving? The bridge between feeling and craving are the underlying tendencies that I spoke about yesterday. The 7 types of underlying tendencies. There is the underlying tendency towards craving, towards grasping. The underlying tendency towards resistance, pushing away. The underlying tendency towards ignorance. The underlying tendency towards views. The underlying tendency towards doubt. The underlying tendency towards conceit. And the underlying tendency towards being or bhava. When there is a pleasant feeling, that pleasant feeling is just a feeling. But because you have a self-image in the mind, it relates that feeling to that sense of self and says, this feeling is good to me. And so therefore, there is the underlying tendency, the potential for craving to arise and say, I want more of it. When that self-identification process is there There can be the bhava, that I want more of it and I want to be more like that. There can be the conceit that says, I am that. There can be the view which defends and says, and has different kinds of opinions about that experience. There can be the doubt in relation to what is wholesome and unwholesome regarding that experience. And there can be ignorance, not being aware of the Four Noble Truths of that experience itself, not recognizing that this experience is actually impermanent, dependent upon causes and conditions, therefore not worth holding on to, and therefore not me, mine, and myself. This whole process of the three characteristics, it's very important to understand at the level of feeling. Now, when we talk about anatta, we're saying that which is not self. Here the Buddha is saying, okay, let's say that there is a self. In ancient India, there was the concept of this self. And that self was said to be all-pervasive, eternal, and the source of happiness. And the Buddha says we're going to use that as a touchstone. Okay? We're going to use that as a touchstone to see if what you're experiencing is actually self. When in your modalities of experience, through contact with the body, through feeling, through perception, through intentions, through awareness, what you realize is those are dependent upon causes and conditions, which means if they are dependent on causes and conditions, you take away the causes and conditions, then they're gone. Which means that they are impermanent. Already you see that it is impermanent. If what is impermanent, if it is happy, if it's joyful, if it is impermanent, is liable to change. Therefore, there is inherent suffering in the pleasurable feeling. And of course, painful feeling in itself is also dukkha. So all of that, being impermanent and liable to cause suffering, means that these cannot be considered to be self. So the Buddha never talked about whether there is a self or whether there is not a self. All he pointed out to saying is, see that all conditioned experience does not belong to any kind of self. There is no underlying permanent self in any experience there. Once you understand that, you take things impersonal. You don't see them as me, mine, or myself. When that happens, none of those underlying tendencies arise. And when none of those underlying tendencies arise, they cannot bridge to full-blown craving for sensual pleasures, which says, I want that, or I don't want that, or I identify with that. Or craving for existence, which says, I want to be that. Or craving for non-existence, which says, I don't want to be that. So can you 6R craving? That's the whole crux of the matter, right? You have to identify when the tightness and tension arises in relation to an experience, and you realize that the mind says, I want that, or I hate that, or I want to be that. When you can recognize that, you can see, oh, craving is starting to come. You can recognize that, release your attention from that, relax the tightness and tension, come back to the smile, and be free of that craving. So this delineation point, everything from ignorance all the way up to feeling, all of that is old karma that you have inherited. The Buddha has said that karma is to be experienced and felt. But now you have a choice after this experience or through this experience. You can choose to take that experience personally and therefore cause further suffering through the mechanics of craving, clinging, and habitual tendencies, and then act from there, causing yourself more suffering. Or you can recognize the craving and clinging and let it go before it becomes full-blown suffering. And allow that feeling just to pass, because it will pass. Whether it's a pleasant experience, an unpleasant experience, or a neutral experience. If you just understand this one thing, which is all things are impersonal, Don't take anything personally. Everything else will fall into place. If you stop taking things personally, all experiences will be fully experienced, but there won't be a thirst. There won't be that trishna. There won't be that tanha, that craving for more of that experience. It will just be an experience, that's it. And it will continue. And the mind will remain free of any kind of underlying tendencies. Mind will be free of any kind of defilements. Free of any kind of fetters. A mind without craving, if you will. So to let go of craving, it requires the utmost attention. But you cannot force that attention either. You can't be like, I am going to be attentive 100%. That's already a craving for existence, isn't it? I want to do it this way. Yeah, sure, you can have the wholesome inclination and say, I want to be more mindful. But it's not a process of constructing that experience. It's a process of relaxing into it. Just relax into the moment. Allow the mind to observe everything as it actually is. Yatta Buddha Jnana Dasanam. Equanimity. Balanced mind, just watching everything with ease. Not letting the mind grasp onto this or that, just seeing it. As soon as you recognize the mind saying, oh, I really like that, that's really interesting to me. Now you're going to be like, oh, I want more of that. Or, that's really displeasurable. I hate that. I don't want that. As soon as you start to recognize these kinds of thoughts coming up to the surface, you can just recognize them and let them go, using right effort. And in that moment you experience peace. Nothing else to do there. So when a noble disciple has understood craving, the origin of craving, the cessation of craving, and the way leading to the cessation of craving, he here and now makes an end of suffering. He here and now makes an end of suffering. As soon as you siksar that, you have let go of suffering in that moment. There's nothing else to do after that. Then the mind is free. Of course, it takes practice because another thought comes up and says, oh, I really like this. Or another clinging comes up, or another becoming comes up. So what do you do there? Keep siksaring. Keep recognizing. Mindfulness. Let go, let go, let go. When you get to that quiet mind, right? Some of you are already in quiet mind. What is the tendency of the mind? Oh, that's an interesting thought. Let me see where this goes. And then when that happens, what happens? More thoughts come up. It all branches out. And now you're no longer in quiet mind. But if you just use quiet mind as your base and let the thoughts just pass, there's no engagement with any thought, then you're already free from that. See, the mind, the Buddha, that's what the Buddha said. The mind is luminous. Luminous is this mind, monks. Pabhasar chitta. The mind is naturally luminous. The mind is naturally aware. But the problem is when the mind starts to engage in its different contents. As soon as there's attention given to that, it makes the contents grow. But if you recognize that and let it go and come back to that relaxed mind, everything else falls into place. Nothing else to do. That's why I say there's nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no one to be. Just relax. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. "But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands feeling, the origin of feeling, the cessation of feeling, and the way leading to the cessation of feeling, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is feeling? What is the origin of feeling? What is the cessation of feeling? What is the way leading to the cessation of feeling? There are these 6 classes of feeling: feeling born of eye contact, born of ear contact, born of nose contact, born of tongue contact, born of body contact, born of mind contact. With the arising of contact, there is the arising of feeling. With the cessation of contact, there is the cessation of feeling. The way leading to the cessation of feeling is just this noble eightfold path. When a noble disciple has thus understood feeling, the origin of feeling, the cessation of feeling, and the way leading to the cessation of feeling, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. You cannot 6R feeling away, but you can 6R your reactions in relation to that feeling, which are the underlying tendencies. The same way you cannot 6R the hindrance away. You can only recognize your reactions to that hindrance, whether it's pain or some kind of mental hindrance, and let go of your reactions, your reactivity to that, before it becomes into full-blown craving, clinging, and becoming. So this process of right effort is actually identifying what is happening in relation to any kind of experience and letting go of the need to control that experience, letting go of the need to identify with that experience, and letting it just be there. So you can't 6R feeling, but you can 6R your reactions in relation to that feeling. And then just let the feeling be. Feeling arises and passes away, dependent upon contact. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. "But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands contact, the origin of contact, the cessation of contact, and the way leading to the cessation of contact, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is contact? What is the origin of contact? What is the cessation of contact? What is the way leading to the cessation of contact? There are these 6 classes of contact: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, and mind contact. With the arising of the 6-fold base, there is the arising of contact. With the cessation of the 6-fold base, there is the cessation of contact. The way leading to the cessation of contact is just this noble eightfold path. Contact, it's the trigger that gives rise to the actual experience. In a sense, you can cease feeling and you can cease contact. When you achieve Nirodha Samapatti, when you achieve the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, there is no more contact going on, and therefore there is no more feeling going on, no more perception going on, no more awareness, not even any awareness to know that you are in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. Remember, this is different from the asanyata beings. Asanyata means that there is no perception there. True, it sounds the same as Nirodha, but the difference is, in the asanyata, when the mind comes out of that, there is no contact with Nibbana. And there is no wisdom that arises. But with Nirodha, or Nirodha Samapatti, the mind becomes unconditioned, makes contact with the unconditioned, and experiences Nibbana. So you can cease contact. It's not like you can 6R contact though. Because contact is happening all the time. That's contact right there. All the time. When you're hearing my voice, that's contact. And then the feeling and the perception of that voice. When you're seeing me, there's contact constantly. When you go into the realm of infinite consciousness, and you see the arising and passing away of consciousness, you're seeing contact. Coming and going, contact, 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 contact. Because contact is made up of 3 components, right? It's the sense base, the object of the sense base coming together. Dependent upon that is the arising of the sense-based consciousness, and the joining of the 3 is contact. Now that contact can be imbued with craving, because that's dependent upon formations, up the links of dependent origination, which we're going to discuss in a minute. Yeah, so the sense-based object, so the I and form, and the sense-based consciousness, dependent upon the 2. Yes, in that moment you're breaking your contact with the hindrance. Yes. So now we're going to start with the 6 sense bases. Saying, "Good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands the 6-fold base, the origin of the 6-fold base, the cessation of the 6-fold base, and the way leading to the cessation of the 6-fold base, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is the 6-fold base? What is the origin of the 6-fold base? What is the cessation of the 6-fold base? What is the way leading to the cessation of the 6-fold base? There are these 6 bases: the eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, and the mind base. With the arising of mentality materiality, there is the arising of the 6-fold base. With the cessation of mentality materiality, there is the cessation of the 6-fold base. The way leading to the cessation of the 6-fold base is just this noble 8-fold path. So the 6 sense bases, that's what we're talking about here. From the 6 sense bases, there can be contact. So when we talk about contact, we need 3 things for contact, right? We need the sense base, we need the object of the sense base, and we need the consciousness of the sense base. A person might still have their eyes, but they might be blind. There might be rupa, there might be, stuff in front of them. But if there's no consciousness of the I, then there cannot be any contact. So if the sense base is impaired in some way, that might not give rise to contact. In this way, when there's the cessation of a sense base, there's the cessation of a feeling. But also, when you are in the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, it is understood that the faculties are clear. There's a question which we'll explore in a few days in one of the suttas, which is, what is the difference between a dead person and one in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness? In one who is dead, the sense faculties are broken up, no longer functional. But in one who is in cessation, the sense faculties are said to be clear. Your sense faculties are always impeded by traffic of data packets of sensory information. Constantly. Every time you're seeing something, it's just constant barrage of photons hitting the eye. Every time you're hearing something, it's constant barrage of sound waves. One who is in cessation, their sense faculties are clear because there is no more impediment of receiving any kind of input, because there's no more consciousness there. The six sense bases are dependent upon mentality materiality. Now you can't 6R the sense bases themselves, but you can 6R all the way until you enter cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, and thereby no six sense bases are functional in that time period, so long as the mind has ceased. Now, in order for the six sense bases to function, they need mentality materiality. In other words, the six sense bases are part of mentality materiality. They are physical, right? The eyes, the ears, the nose, the body, the tongue. And in the mind, let's say the brain, they are physical. So they are part of materiality. They are made up of the four great elements, the four states of matter. And in order for them to function, they require mental activity. They require mental input. That is the mentality materiality. If that is not there, the six sense bases will not function, and thereby there won't be any feeling, let alone craving, clinging, becoming, and so on. So when you 6R, you can 6R all the way until you have cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And even there, the sense faculties are not active. There is no more contact. There is no more mentality going on. And yes, there is body, but there is no sensation of the body being there at all. And the way leading to that is the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the 6Rs. Saying, "Good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When a noble disciple understands mentality materiality, the origin of mentality materiality, the cessation of mentality materiality, and the way leading to the cessation of mentality materiality, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is mentality materiality? What is the origin of mentality materiality? What is the cessation of mentality materiality? What is the way leading to the cessation of mentality materiality? Feeling, perception, volition, contact, and attention. These are called mentality. The four great elements and the material form derived from the four great elements, these are called materiality. So this mentality and this materiality are what is called mentality materiality. With the arising of consciousness, there is the arising of mentality materiality. With the cessation of consciousness, there is the cessation of mentality materiality. The way leading to the cessation of mentality materiality is just this Noble Eightfold Path. When a noble disciple has thus understood mentality materiality, the origin of mentality materiality, the cessation of mentality materiality, and the way leading to the cessation of mentality materiality, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Mentality, this is mind. Mind, in order to function, is dependent upon the body. In order for you to know you have a body, you need a mind. Mind is known by its faculties of contact, feeling, perception, intention, and attention. In essence, these are the five aggregates. Through contact, you experience form. Through contact, you experience feeling, you experience perception. You have the formations through which intention arises, or through which through intention, which formations arise. And then awareness or consciousness arises through attention. Wherever you put your attention, the spotlight of attention, that's where consciousness flows. So this is in talking about the 5 aggregates. When you are in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, you don't have a mind. And you don't have a mind to know that you have a body. Therefore, you don't have the sense basis, because there is no consciousness. Sure, functionally the sense spaces are there. Functionally the body is there. Functionally mentality is there. Now, with the upcoming research on what happens when you're in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness from the University of Amsterdam, we'll get more clarity on what's actually happening in the brain in terms of is there perception, is there feeling, and so on. But the understanding here is that mentality allows you to have contact, allows you to have feeling, allows you to have perception, allows you to have intention, allows you to have attention. So the faculty of contact, which are the things in the brain or in the mind that allow you to perceive contact, allow you to have the process of contact. So there is the faculty and there is the process. The faculty of contact, which is, let's say, an organ or a receptor or some kind of function within the mind that facilitates the process of contact to happen. The faculty of feeling, which facilitates the process of feeling. The faculty of perception, which allows the process of perception. The faculty of intention. The faculty of attention, which allow these processes to happen. This is what it encompasses the mind. And the mind can be seen in different ways. There is the mano, the chitta, and the vijnana, right? The vijnana is the consciousness. The chitta is the mindset. And the mano can be understood as the physical organ of the brain. But the mind also is not just limited to the brain or limited to the heart, as some traditions would say, or some people would say. The mind encompasses everything from the top of the head to the tips of the toes, and even beyond. This is why it is understood that the mind can perceive things outside of its own body on a extrasensory perception level, let's say. We won't get into all of that, but I'm just saying the mind, as we understand it, is understood through its process of contact, feeling, perception, intention, and attention. And this form that we experience, this body that we experience, this is made up of the 4 great elements: the earth element, the water element, the air element, and the fire element. This is the solidity, the liquid state, the gaseous state, and the heat, the temperature in the body. In one who is in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, heat and vitality are still present. So the 4 great elements which make up the body are still present. It's not like they cease in that sense. But here what the Buddha, or Sariputta is pointing out is if there is no mentality, materiality, if there is no mind, functional mind, if there is no functional materiality, and there cannot be any functional sense base. If there is no functional sense base, contact would not be possible, and therefore feeling would not be possible, and the potential for craving, clinging, becoming, and birth would not be possible. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. "But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma?" There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands consciousness, the origin of consciousness, the cessation of consciousness, and the way leading to the cessation of consciousness, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is consciousness? What is the origin of consciousness? What is the cessation of consciousness? What is the way leading to the cessation of consciousness? There are these 6 classes of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. With the arising of formations, there is the arising of consciousness. With the cessation of formations, there is the cessation of consciousness. The way leading to the cessation of consciousness is just this noble eightfold path. When a noble disciple has thus understood consciousness, the origin of consciousness, the cessation of consciousness, and the way leading to the cessation of consciousness, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. Consciousness here is referring to the awareness of sensory experiences. Without consciousness, there cannot be the awareness of mentality materiality. But without mentality materiality, there cannot be the arising of consciousness. So they are interdependent. One cannot be without the other. So when there is consciousness, there can be contact. That contact is dependent upon 6 sense base, which is dependent upon mentality materiality. Now, there's another way of understanding consciousness as being the mindset, the chitta, which is where we talk about mano, vijnana, and chitta being synonymous in one way. There's a sutta in which the Buddha says, there's a way in which chitta, vijnana, and mano have the same meaning but different terminologies, and different meanings with different terminologies. And this is in that sutta, this is where the word monkey mind comes from. The Buddha calls the mind like a monkey, jumping from one branch to the other. So this mindset, if this mindset is tainted, think about the mindset like a window, the consciousness like a window. If the formations are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, then it will be defiled. That consciousness will be defiled. There are 16 defilements that can defile that consciousness. Things like envy, jealousy, hatred, stinginess, things like that can defile the mindset. Once the mindset is defiled, the inclination of the mind, which then shows or informs how the being is experiencing something, can give rise to full-blown craving. This is what I mean by craving being in each of the links of dependent origination. If the formations, that is to say, your mental, bodily, and verbal sankharas, if they are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, they color the consciousness. That consciousness then colors the way the contact is experienced, and then the feeling is experienced. That can give rise to underlying tendencies, which can give rise to full-blown craving, clinging, and becoming. So, it says, saying, "Good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands formations, the origin of formations, the cessation of formations, and the way leading to the cessation of formations, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what are formations? What is the origin of formations? What is the cessation of formations? What is the way leading to the cessation of formations? There are these 3 kinds of formations: the bodily formation, the verbal formation, the mental formations. With the cessation of ignorance, there is the cessation of formations. The way leading to the cessation of formations is just this noble eightfold path. That is right. When a noble disciple has thus understood formations, the origin of formations, the cessation of formations, and the way leading to the cessation of formations, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. So formations, samskaras or sankharas, they are carriers of information and carriers of karma. Like I said, if the formations are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, if they are dependent upon ignorance, they will taint the consciousness that arises and give the potential of craving to arise, provide the potentials for craving to arise. These are the abhisankharas. Now here's a question. What links of dependent origination, if any, are present in the mind without craving? Feeling would be there. All the way up to feeling. But no ignorance. So ignorance is replaced by right view, wisdom. And then the formations are no longer rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. So the consciousness is said to be clear, untainted. And then from there, the mentality materiality gives rise to the six sense bases. The contact is not imbued with any craving. The feeling will have no underlying tendencies. Like Sariputta says, he has extirpated the underlying tendency to the view and conceit I am, abolished the underlying tendency of aversion, and eradicated the underlying tendency towards craving. So for the mind that is fully awakened, there will be right view. Formations will still be there, but they will not be giving rise to any greed, hatred, and delusion. Consciousness will be there. Mentality, materiality will be there. Six sense bases will be there. Contact will be there. Feeling will be there. But because that mind is always mindful, there is no scope for craving to arise. Therefore, no clinging, no becoming, no birth of new action. But a fully awakened mind produces actions, doesn't it? It thinks, it speaks, it acts. So what is the difference there? Now there is no more ignorance. The ignorance here is the ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. That's gone. Now there is full wisdom. But the formations that arise dependent upon contact. This is the other thing for you to understand. We see dependent origination as a linear process, but actually what's going on is there are feedback loops. When contact arises, it feeds back to formations to give rise to a certain kind of consciousness that then allows you to be aware of the feeling. If that feeling is taken personally, it feeds back to the ignorance. But if there is none of that, then there will be a weakening of the ignorance. So now there are these two types of formations in terms of the synapses, right? The synapses that are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. If you continue to act out of greed, hatred, and delusion, if the intentions are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, then those formations will be strengthened. Those formations will be activated, give rise to consciousness that is tainted, and give rise for the potential for further craving from feeling. But if you become mindful and you let go of any kind of craving, you weaken those formations until there is only those formations that are purified, pure formations. These pure formations are just carriers of karma for the arahant, for the one who is fully awakened. That is why, in the case of Angulimala, he still experienced pain. In the case of Moggallana, he still experienced the effects of his unwholesome karma in the past prior to full awakening. But he didn't produce any new karma. He's just experiencing the old karma facilitated by the formations. So now these formations are dependent upon ignorance. Now we will talk about that. Saying, "Good friend," the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands ignorance, the origin of ignorance, the cessation of ignorance, and the way leading to the cessation of ignorance, in that way he is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what is ignorance? What is the origin of ignorance? What is the cessation of ignorance? What is the way leading to the cessation of ignorance? Not knowing about suffering, not knowing about the origin of suffering, not knowing about the cessation of suffering, and not knowing about the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is ignorance. The mundane ignorance is not being able to apply the Four Noble Truths, ignoring the Four Noble Truths. Then the level below that is the ignorance where you've never been introduced to the Four Noble Truths. There's nothing you can do about it. But once you're introduced to it, that ignorance goes away. But if you stop being mindful and not being able to apply the Four Noble Truths, that ignorance continues to be strengthened. Now, with the arising of the taints, the asavas, there is the arising of ignorance. With the cessation of the taints, there is the cessation of ignorance. The way leading to the cessation of ignorance is just this Noble Eightfold Path. When a noble disciple has thus understood ignorance, the origin of ignorance, the cessation of ignorance, and the way leading to the cessation of ignorance, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view and has arrived at this true Dhamma. When you go through the levels of awakening, you start to let go of levels and layers of ignorance as you start to continue to apply wisdom that is facilitated by mindfulness. But every time you are not able to recognize when your mind takes something personally, it feeds energy back to that ignorance. That energy of ignorance then feeds back to the karmic formations, and down the links of dependent origination it goes. At feeling, you still have the choice to take that personally again, or to see for what it is, that it is impermanent and impersonal, and let go of it, thereby not producing any craving, clinging, becoming, birth of action, or further suffering. So ignorance is dependent upon the taints, it says, the asavas. Now we'll talk about what these asavas are. Saying, good friend, the bhikkhus delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Sariputta's words. Then they asked him a further question. But friend, might there be another way in which a noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, has arrived at this true Dhamma? There might be, friends. When, friends, a noble disciple understands the taints, the origin of the taints, the cessation of the taints, and the way leading to the cessation of the taints, in that way he is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma. And what are the taints? What is the origin of the taints? What is the cessation of the taints? What is the way leading to the cessation of the taints? There are these three taints: the taint of sensual desire, the taint of being, and the taint of ignorance. With the arising of ignorance, there is the arising of the taints. With the cessation of ignorance, there is the cessation of the taints. The way leading to the cessation of the taints is just this Noble Eightfold Path. So the asavas, they are the substratum for this whole process of one arising of dependent origination. What is the taint of sensual desire? Anytime you take personally a sensual experience and feed into it through craving, you feed back to the taint of sensual desire, which then gives rise to further ignorance. Anytime you have a desire to become something or not to become something, you feed back into the taint of the desire for being. And anytime you have a lack of mindfulness, you feed back to the taint of ignorance, which gives rise to further ignorance. Now, as you saw, ignorance is dependent upon the taints. but the taints are also dependent upon ignorance. Because at the very, very foundation of this, what it's talking about is when there is a lack of attention, a lack of mindfulness, there is going to be the arising of the taints and the arising of ignorance, from which then the rest of the contaminated links of dependent origination arise. But every time you 6R, what are you doing? You recognize, you bring up mindfulness. You bring up the other enlightenment factors, and you let go of ignorance bit by bit through that mindfulness, through that right effort. So if you catch yourself starting to have a desire to become something, you catch yourself with the thought that I want this or I don't want this, you notice that tightness and tension, and you let it go, you are weakening the fetters. You are weakening the taint of sensual desire, weakening the taint of being. You're weakening the taint of ignorance. So this is the way to understand it. It all comes down to having attention, proper attention. As you continue to do this, bit by bit, those taints go away. Now, in the case of one who becomes an anagami, they have completely destroyed the taint of sensual desire. In one who becomes fully awakened, they have completely destroyed the taint of ignorance and the taint of the desire for being. That's why another name for an arahat is kinasava, one who has destroyed the taints. And the way to destroy the taints, bit by bit, is to becoming mindful of whenever the mind has sensual desire, the desire for being, or a general lack of attention. The more you understand this, the more you see this, the closer you start to get towards full awakening. So the more you 6R, in meditation, in walking meditation, in any moment of your life, for those few moments you experience Nibbana. For those few moments, your mind is fully awakened. But what happens? Then another thing comes up. So that then you just have to keep letting go, keep relaxing, until the mind becomes fully void, fully empty of any kind of craving, any kind of desire for being, any kind of ignorance, any kind of wrong view, any kind of conceit, any kind of identification process. When a noble disciple has thus understood the taints, the origin of the taints, the cessation of the taints, and the way leading to the cessation of the taints, he entirely abandons the underlying tendency to lust. He abolishes the underlying tendency to aversion. He extirpates the underlying tendency to the view and conceit I am. And by abandoning ignorance and arousing true knowledge, he here and now makes an end of suffering. In that way, too, a noble disciple is one of right view, whose view is straight, who has unwavering confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at this true Dhamma. That is what the Venerable Sariputta said. The bhikkhus were delighted and satisfied in the Venerable Sariputta's words.